Hey man, finally
My guy,
got
what's
you here,
happening?
dude. It's
Hey,
been
thanks
a
for having
couple
me.
years since I've been asking you if you'd be willing to do this if I ever got it off the ground.
Well, I'm glad that we're here now, and I hope I don't disappoint you.
Oh, dude, that's impossible, brother. I mean, God, you started Master Your Ash, which, by the way, thanks for the hat.
You're welcome.
Really cool.
Absolutely.
You started that how long ago?
It's gonna be 4 years. I started it in February of 2021 was when the initial episodes first got published, and yeah, been doing it ever since.
That's crazy because I do want to get into later some of the pitfalls of cigar content on, social media. But I do want to start with our cigar because we're losing light.
Yeah, absolutely. We should light something up, right?
Yeah, what'd you bring for us today?
So I brought few different treats. I figured that you know, the more the merrier, right? So the one on the left is the Umbagog. That's by Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. Steve Saka, very well known for all the work that he put in with Drew Estate as a master blender, and pretty much their official cigar master blender for a very long time. Came out with, I'm sure you're familiar with, the League of Pravada line.
Definitely, yeah.
Okay, so that was the brainchild of Steve Saka, and then later on Nick Melillo, who's another one that you probably know through the Joe Rogan podcast.
The name, yes, but I
Right.
might have missed that one.
So Foundation Cigars is Nick Melillo's brand now. He kind of came with Saka a little after Saka started, learned alongside of Saka, and now does all of the cigars for Joe Rogan show.
Oh, that's so that when you see him smoking, that's what he's smoking.
Yeah, he's smoking a Foundation cigar.
Oh, that's
And
awesome.
he learned a lot, I'm sure, from Steve Saka, just like Saka would probably say he learned a lot from Nick. So, there's a great lineage in the cigar history, and that's one of them. This particular one, I think, is going to be probably on the majority of at least the cigar content creators' top list for this year. Came out this year as a kind of like a limited production release to an already existing line that Steve had with Dunbarton. So this one is a Rothschild, is the name of the size, 5 by 48, right? And cigars all have different shapes and sizes, but a lot of them are categorized based off of the Cuban metric. So there's the number ones, number twos, number threes, number fours, and all of those kind of have a stylistic name to them, if you will, right? And then the other cigar is by Kyle Giles and Warped Cigars. So Kyle Giles also has a very unique connection into the culture and the history of cigar making. His family was involved in it way back in the day, and then he decided to kind of create his own brand and his own line. Warped is the ideology, at least to my understanding, is that it is a brand that has very unique kind of blends to them, and they also pride themselves on being very Cuban-esque in a lot of their cigar lines. The Isla de Cocodrillo, or the Crocodile Island, that you have in your hand is slightly bigger, but he also rolls a really mean, like, a smaller cigar, which I thought would work well with the current time of day. Something short that we can get through in a little bit. And that one should also be on a lot of lists this year. They're all readily available sticks, and people can find them everywhere pretty much. They're just they're under $15 each MSRP, and they're quality blends, quality brands. I love them. I also brought you another one as like a takeaway for everybody.
Oh, wow.
This is an actual. We were talking a little bit about like store blends
Oh,
and
yeah.
how certain shops all have like their own blend of cigars. So this is by Sanj Patel. His shop is based in Bloomfield, New Jersey, which is where my parents went to high school, oddly enough. And that's his store blend. It's called the RS88. It's a very heavy Maduro, almost full-bodied cigar that comes in right around $8.
Oh, wow.
So it's a huge value, and I figured that would segue into the conversation that we wanted to get into about store blends and kind of how everything goes in the cigar industry. But we can smoke either one, either the Warped or the Umbagog to start off.
I'll go with your suggestion. We're starting with coffee. I know we were going to talk a little bit about your thesis in champagne. So, what do you think is one more suited to the espresso and the champagne after that? Or
They're both going to be great. I say that we start with the Warped
boom, let's go.
and just go that way.
And thank you. This is awesome.
Yeah, man.
I remember I was originally having trouble seasoning my humidor when I got this from a friend a while back, and I wasn't patient with it. So I asked you what to do, and you're like, well, in some cases you might have to seal if it's got the glass top. Fortunately, I did it, and I got to go to Big Smoke with Chef Nicole Bryson, and she's like royalty there. So she got me a bunch of swag. It was so much fun. I got to meet a lot of really cool people. And then I stocked my cigar humidor. And then I was like, what do I do? I don't want to lose these cigars again. And you said if you throw them all in there and you get your, like, you said 2 packs, but I had a big one of this and I used another one of these. And you said in about a week it should be. And if it's still at about 70, then you're good and it's seasoned and we're ready to roll.
Yeah, and it looked like everything worked out.
Yeah.
You know, the hydrometer looks good, and you can always pick up one of these too. Take one of your cigars out of that.
Sure.
So this is a handheld hydrometer, and I use this for every cigar that I review on the channel.
Should it be an open one or a sealed one?
You can do a sealed one, that's fine. So when I do my overhead shots to kind of introduce the cigar in the first couple of minutes,
Sure.
I always do a hydrometer check, and it brings up a lot of questions like, what do I like to smoke my cigars at? What type of RH or relative humidity inside of the cigar? So,
Wait, so real quick, so because this is 70, but that doesn't mean the cigar is at 70%.
Correct.
Okay.
Especially when you're dealing with like multiple level humidors, every shelf can have a different humidity, and then you also have some cigars that have really dark wrappers that give off a little bit more humidity than other cigars that have lighter wrappers. That's just a generalization. Does not necessarily mean that a lighter wrapper is always going to give off less. It's just certain cigars in their blends, they've got certain tobaccos in them that hold more water than others. It's kind of like me being bloated, right? I might hold more water than you.
It's just like, what have we been doing this week?
Right.
How much salt?
So a hydrometer, you just pop the cigar in and it will show you a readout. This says 64, but your humidor says 70. Now, it's also wrapped in plastic and, you know, somewhat sealed and covered, but it's a great barometer to see like, hey, what am I actually smoking my cigars at, and do I like that? And I think that that's the biggest question that I try to pose to the audience with my channel is like, well, I like smoking my cigars a little bit on the drier side because we live in a dry climate and I'm always smoking outside when I'm doing reviews. So for me, if I get something out of the humidor and it's 75 RH or 73 or even higher than 70 in any way, and I take it to 20 or 18, I light it up, I start burning it for an hour, tends to shock the cigar to the point where it can crack at the end. And I want to avoid that.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So now, based on this cigar, I still can't bake because you said all the tobaccos are different. You're saying that all these cigars could be a variation where some could be up to 70. Would there'd never be over what that's in there though, right? Because it would be like too much humidity. Like it wouldn't go over what's in the.
Well, that has kind of like its own little ecosystem that it has going on right now. Like there's a homeostasis that's definitely maintained in a humidor that small.
Okay.
But in very large humidors, that homeostasis can go out of whack really fast because typically you're storing a lot more cigars.
Yeah.
If you have any type of humidification that's in that humidor, all of those cigars are interacting with that humidification. Some of them, once again, store more moisture. So if there's a lot of humidity going out in that little ecosystem that's going on in your humidor, and you have a cigar that's really into storing moisture in its leaves, it's going to store the moisture. Can I throw that in there? Is
Absolutely,
that okay?
yeah. There are ashtrays. And actually, let me open the door real quick.
Just wanted to make sure that I'm not, desecrating the set here. Hmm? Gotcha.
Okay. All right. So, just so we can get to start smoking, let's go over a few things that you taught me, because I remember. So I opened up 8 Cigar Lounge, 2021, I think that was, and with under John Petty and Click, I was just leading the bar. But you need to know a lot about cigars. The better you know about your product at the venue, then the better your bartender. It doesn't just have to do with bartending for you to be like a good bartender knows everything going on in the restaurant and every facet.
Sure.
I don't like when I go to a cigar lounge and they're like, don't know anything about cigars, don't take any interest. And it's like, how long you worked here? You knew? And it's like, no, I've been here 5 years. And you're like, you've been here 5 years, you didn't pick up anything about cigars yet? Like, come on. So I didn't want that to happen. And I was picking your brain left and right when I started going to JR, and I think you helped start. I don't know how that came, but we have that cigar club that we do first Monday of every month. And I was like, I don't want to look like a dope.
I can tell you the backstory on all that stuff. But yeah.
Okay, so but now you showed me first, like obviously you have your different cuts,
Yeah.
and I want this to be sort of a reoccurring segment, and I want to start out with the basics for all the people that might be getting into cigars for the first time watching this because they're watching my bar content, but being a bartender and beverage goes hand in hand with cigars, so I feel like there's a really relevant part, and knowing what you're doing is nice instead of like looking like a rookie. You know, it's like fake it till you make it type thing, right?
Yeah.
So I'm using a straight cut, and that's kind of my preferred because it allows a little more smoke than a V cut.
Sure.
Right.
Which is what I use. Yep.
Right. And I noticed that's like so you have a preferred V. You prefer V cut. Mm-hmm. And do you do the cross?
No, I don't
No.
do a rose/cross cut. Ever.
Rose or cross? It's both same term.
Same term.
Okay.
Yeah. I didn't even know what that was until I started my channel. I was like, rose cut, what is that? And they're like, no, it's when you take the V cut and then you go the opposite direction and make like kind of a split to it.
Okay.
So yeah, they call it a rose because basically you have like 4 little parts that are sticking out, so it looks like a rose.
Right. I mean that's okay. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I actually have a foolproof straight cutter that you can't get too deep into the cigar, so I don't ever cut too much.
Yeah, safety.
But there's definitely a lot. I've seen a lot of people snip a whole bunch of it off, and you're only trying to get just the very tip of the what they call the cap, right?
Yep.
Um,
The very first show that I did for my channel, I had Matt Booth from Room 101, who's a character in it of itself, and he was taking his cigars and peeling off the cap with his thumbnail.
oh my god!
And I don't have long enough nails to do that in general, but when
Oh, and he does the thing where it's like,
he just and he was like, you know what, if I have to, I'll chew it. And I'm just like, this is the brand owner and like my first official show, and I'm over here like worried that I'm not doing this correctly, that I'm gonna I was worried because I've been a V-cut fan, so I've been smoking cigars for 20 plus years. Like before I got into the bar, cigars were my first love. So the the V-cut thing has been with me for forever. It was just always my preferred way of enjoying a cigar. And going back to that, I think that just like everybody has their own specific way that they like to enjoy their cocktails,
right?
you have a certain cut and a style that you like. You have a certain lighter that you like. You know, you're using a jet. I used a soft flame. Does any one have an advantage over the other? Depends on who you talk to, right? Like we're outside. If it was windy right now, you'd be able to light your cigar. Me, I would probably struggle. So,
Well, that's a big thing, and I did want to say. So first, you taught me you never let the flame touch the tip until you've actually ready to ignite it.
Yeah.
You're trying to toast the outside, warm up that tobacco on the end. Is that still correct?
yeah, I mean, with a jet, you run more of a risk because it's such a hotter flame to scorch the edge of your cigar. So you want to keep it a fair distance away where, like with a soft flame, you can really kind of get into it a little bit further because you're not dealing with as hot of a flame. You're not going to singe the end of your cigar and cause like a lot of off flavors when you
Okay.
light it.
So I brought this out just to talk about it because you always see them around. You never see anyone that like
Cedar?
really smokes cigars a lot, using them too much. In my experience, obviously you wouldn't do it on a windy day or anything. When do you use cedar? Is it cool to use cedar? Is it not cool to use cedar? Like, what's the deal with this?
Once again, everybody has their own preferred style. If you enjoy using cedar to light your cigar, that's fine. Nothing wrong with it. What I will say is that it can be a little tough to control at times. You have to do that whole entire, like, it starts here, when the flame's hot enough or when the flame's high enough, then you can kind of flip over and shorten it a little bit so that you have more control. And like for me, all of my lighters are typically single jets if they're jet lighters, so it'll have one single flame that I can control. I don't have like the dual or the triple or the quadruple, you know, all the crazy jets that they have now. Because
And
I
those
want
gadgets get expensive.
they do. I mean, like, you know, the DuPont line of lighters, those can go for $2,000, $3,000. And those have like a mixture sometimes. You can get the soft and the jet in them together. They call it the Legrand. But yeah, it's one of those to where I like more control with the light. So I don't use cedar because I feel like there's less control. Also, after you burn the cedar once, you really can't use it again. I mean, sometimes you can like put it out in the ashtray really quick. It looks kind of, you know, it looks a little disheveled, but you can pick it up again and light it. However, are you going to do that if you have to touch up your cigar?
Yeah.
Right?
And like every time and all that.
Right. So practicality.
Okay. Cool. Because it's like I've always had them. I've tried using them a couple times, and I end up grabbing the torch after.
What do you taste in your cigar so far?
Well, I'm enjoying it with this Michele d'Oro espresso.
It's very tasty.
I'm getting a lot of like earthiness, like sort of and I don't know if that's coming from the combination of the bean with, with that.
Hmm.
Some soft spice, not a spicy cigar, but like a little. Is it like a pepper, sort of?
Definitely. Do you retrohale when you smoke cigars?
Retrohale.
Yeah, like exiting the smoke through your nostrils.
I've never no.
Okay.
Okay, teach me.
So you know how you just blew the smoke out of your mouth, right?
Yeah,
You're going like this. Like that, right?
yeah.
Okay.
Because it's like they say you never inhale, of course,
Right.
and you absorb, like let it sit in your mouth for a minute,
Yeah, you do.
for a moment, I should say.
But the next time that you go to exhale, start blowing out of your mouth and then close it and let it come out of your nostrils.
Okay. Now though, I do need to practice because I almost inhaled some. So hold on, let me get a couple tries on that. Because it's definitely like. I see.
Finish your breath by exiting through your nostrils by keeping your mouth closed.
Okay. Okay. On first, it's like starts coming out of my ear.
Now, what do you
Nice.
taste?
That's a new experience for me.
What do you taste? Does it taste different?
It tastes different. I'm having trouble describing it.
It's okay.
Um, you know, it's definitely hold on, let me keep doing that because I swear to God, I've never
Keep doing it.
experienced
We'll
a cigar
come
like
back
that.
to the flavors. It's fine. But the problem that a lot of people do when they first get into the hobby as well is that they just puff at it like it's and I'm not saying this is what you were doing.
Oh, it's okay.
A lot of people, they come from smoking different things, whether it be, something something that they picked up at a head shop, or whether it be cigarettes or hookahs or something like that, right? So we have this muscle memory built in where, like, when I first started smoking, it was just cigars. I had to try cigarettes for the first time just on a whim after I had already smoked a cigar. So for me, inhaling into my lungs, I had never experienced. And that was the one and only time that I ever tried cigarettes. Because the very next day, including that night, I was feeling like shit.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow. That shows you that there is a vast difference between like, because a lot of people are always like, oh, cigars are like 100 cigarettes. That's what I was always told when I was a kid.
Sure.
And it's like, well, that's if you're inhaling, right? Like but I know they say it's a lot of nicotine in here, but and you're going to get a little bit of course, like carcinogens with anything, just like alcohol and everything comes with a little bit of a. If it's fun, there's a drawback. That's just life.
Yeah.
But is there truth to like if as long as you're not inhaling it, it's not similar to a cigarette in that sense of like you're getting because there's not like carcinogens like there are in like filters of a cigarette and stuff, right? Because a lot of people think smoking. If I say, "Oh, I smoke cigars," they just go, "Oh, you're a smoker," and I'm like, "Well, I smoke like 2 cigars a month."
Sure.
It's like I don't consider myself a smoker, and I honestly think like anything in moderation is pretty fine.
But for your health insurance, you would be classified as a tobacco user.
Even 2 times a month.
Yeah.
All right, so. All right, we're gonna have to. This isn't a cigar. This is a fake cigar. But I have to get health insurance for it to matter. So.
Well, I'll preface everything by saying that I am not a doctor and this is not medical advice. However, to my knowledge and from my experience, right, there are a lot of very old people that have smoked dozens of cigars a day in the cigar industry that live well into their 70s, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Right? Arturo Fuente Sr., right, for instance. And then even George Patron. Like there are brands like Padron and Fuente that have a lineage, that have grandfathers and grandparents that lived well into almost the centenarian kind of mark that smoked 20 cigars a day. Do I think that your 2 a month are going to hurt you? Probably not as bad as other things, right?
Right. Me especially. I'm the worst example. God.
So, and I certainly had like my 20s as a bartender and my 30s as a bartender where I did a lot of stuff that was probably way worse than the cigars that we're smoking right now. What I will say to all that is that it's a completely naturally fermented product. So very similar to alcohol in that way. When you think about beer and wine, they undergo a fermentation process. Every spirit undergoes a fermentation process. Cigars do too. Typically, they're shade grown or they're sun grown. There's also a fermentation process with Maduro cigars like the ones from Sanj Patel that I gave you in that pack. They're a little bit darker. That's achieved through an extra long fermentation. So most of your cigars, like the ones that we're smoking right now, that are your typical brown color, they'll undergo fermentation for maybe a week. The Maduro cigars, typically 2 weeks, or somewhere between 10 and 14 days, right? With Cuban cigars, a lot of people have made the argument over time that all of them ship in the same box or in the same bundle, and they undergo an additional fermentation after they leave and go to wherever they rest. So, is it dead plant matter that we're smoking? Yes. Is it all the way dead? Not 100%. Like, there's still a certain amount of oils and chemicals and different things in there that are natural, not like the cigarettes where there's added chemicals.
They're spraying it with shit.
Polyphenols, right? Another
Ooh.
great one. When we talk about pairing and tasting it with water or with espresso or with champagne, right?
Did you say tasting it with water?
Yeah, like smoking a cigar and pairing it with
But water? Really?
With water, right? Yeah.
Like you notice a vast difference between different waters for your cigar enjoyment? Sorry to cut you off. But
No,
just
you're
like,
fine.
I'm like,
No, you're
I'm like,
fine.
what?
I mean,
Another
like,
new thing.
I mean, like pairing it with water as opposed to coffee, champagne, or something else,
Where
right?
it's like you're just getting it's like a pure cigar experience versus where now I'm doing a pairing, like I'm combining flavors.
Right.
Where that's more I'm isolating flavor.
Yeah.
Okay, fair.
And the reason for that is because of the fact that we know that nicotine is water soluble. So you said before there's a fair amount of nicotine in cigars. There is. Nicotine's water soluble. That's why we get that rush. Because even though we're not inhaling it, our saliva in our mouth is still interacting with the cigar smoke. So we're pulling that nicotine through our saliva. The thing about it is, a lot of times as you're smoking, especially for a prolonged period like you do with cigars, your mouth kind of gets flavor receptors numbed to what's going on. And a lot of the heavier compounds in cigars, you honestly can't pick out with just water or your saliva. You need something else. Cigars are fairly alkaline. They're about 5 on the scale usually, 5 to 7 on the pH balance scale, right? So what else is 7 and above? Water. Which means you go alkaline, alkaline.
Okay.
Okay, so from a scientific standpoint, water does not help you whatsoever. Except to make sure that like you're not dehydrated.
Right.
And that you refresh your palate, right?
Right.
Coffee, on the other hand, sits right around the same as cigars. You know, more on the acidic line. Our bodies alkaline it, but it sits right around that 5 to, 6 pH. When you get into spirits and you get into cocktails and you get into wines and champagne, cognac, you're at like 3. So you start going more further down the scale, and that's why you can unlock additional flavors when you pair things.
I mean, that's gonna have to cause it's gonna take me a second to open and everything. That's gonna have to segue into pairing it with. I remember when I first met you, and you're one of the few masters of mixology in town. I don't even know how many there are in the world. Is there a number right now that you know?
I mean, we can get into it. To my knowledge, Tim Weigel is the last certified master mixologist. I believe that there's somewhere around 13 to 15 in the world currently.
Wow.
About 7 to 8 of them reside in Las Vegas.
Boom.
It's a program that I honestly wish the USBG spent more time to cultivate. I wish that from the time where I graduated and received my accreditation in 2018, that they would have included us, helped us to kind of add more legitimacy and get more bartenders on board. But it was something that they never reached out to us. They thought about actually removing the accreditation from the website and everything, to my knowledge.
Wow.
It still stands as like you can take your spirits professional and your advanced bartender, but as far as the road for an advanced bartender to become a master accredited mixologist through the guild, I'm not sure what that road even looks like now.
Wow.
I've never been consulted. I've never been asked. I've never been The only people that have asked me have been bartenders that were interested in either completing one of the first two levels,
Yeah.
and asked me like, "What do you need to do? What do I need to know?" Or, like, who do I need to get in touch with at the USBG in order to apply for the master accreditation?
Well, I will say I have hope because part of the reason I wanted this is for not just like Vegas industry people, but industry in general that are wanting to a resource or understand more about what we're doing. And, Joe Arakawa, him and Jennifer are going to be, they have Spirit and Soul, but Joe is actually the president of USBG as of this new year.
Okay.
And I know he'll be seeing this, and I hope that they're going to come on soon. I talked to Jennifer briefly about it not too long ago when she beat me at a competition. And they're fantastic, and they're doing pop-ups called Spirit and Soul. I'd love to go. I missed the last two, but it's like everyone's talking and raving about him. But he's someone that cares about the craft and cares about. I feel like this newest generation of people that are like starting to get their names out there and starting to be a part of like the Vegas mixology industry. I think we're going to start to see more interest in that again. Like where
I hope so.
there's the craft is coming back. Like don't get me wrong, we've been craft. It's been awesome here. We're actually like I think underappreciated because we have so many spots that I think a few get underappreciated. Whereas and we're not a walking town, like you drive everywhere. So whereas in New York, you can stumble from one place to the next and you keep running into these spots. That's why these big bars, get their names out there. Whereas like here, it's like, oh, you're in the wrong area. Like you're in the wrong destination for me. So I'm not going to take a car down there because I'm already here. And, you miss out on learning about that stuff. But I feel like this might be the spur of that conversation to get more people interested into it. The reason I brought that up though was when this was a thing, and again, it's the hardest accreditation I've ever heard of, and all the people that I respect the most in this town are the people that really they've done that. Like you said, there's 7 of the 13 or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
In Nevada, in Las Vegas,
that live in Las Vegas,
and you're like, they're all people that I'm probably forgetting like 1 or 2, but I know you, JR, Max, right?
Max hasn't.
Max needs to get his butt in gear.
Yeah.
He's just the whiskey guru in town.
But he knows more about whiskey than most of the people that I've ever met.
Then like seriously, he's actually you're off. Like if you're getting third market or anything, I go to him and I go, hey, is this worth it? And he'll be like, no, or yes. But so is Livio?
So it would be Livio because he wrote the book, the Master Accreditation book.
That helps.
So him, Francesco, Tony Aboganum, Armando Rosario, and Bobby Gleason would be the first 5 right there that are like automatically in, right? So what do we have? We have Bobby, Tony, Francesco, Livio, and Armando, did I say?
Yeah.
And then you had JR, who completed it. Nice. It's a champagne time, huh?
Right. They must have known we were popping the champagne.
So you had JR and I who completed it in 2018. Tim Weigel, I believe, was 2020 or 2021. And to my knowledge, those are the only... Yeah, so that's 8. Those are the only ones that I know of off the top of my head. Dale DeGroff, he's considered it, I believe, Steve Beal, because Steve Beal was the one that approved the thesis papers that we submitted. And, that's Keeper of the Quanch, friggin' Beam Suntory, and Glenn Fiddick, Glenn Levitt, like every basic like Scotch big name had something to do with Steve Beal for like the last 30 years. He's still our head judge at the Vegas Global Spirit Awards that I'm a chair judge every single year. So I still get some FaceTime with Steve, which is great because he's the one that approved our our thesis. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of... I don't know if Steve would call himself a master accredited mixologist, but he certainly probably knows just as much, if not maybe even a little bit more about whiskey than even Max. So there's a... And that's the thing about it is that I've always felt as though that the accreditation is one thing. The mindset that you have is that you're always learning. And that the accreditation really only means something if there are people that follow behind you that you can help bring up to that accreditation. And that's why I feel so passionately about them not really doing much with it because I feel as though that it invalidates somewhat
Right.
how important the accreditation is, where there's actually an accreditation that somebody can say that they have a mastery of bartending in a certain way, of mixology, and that there's that lineage. Because, like, when I did my master accreditation, Dale DeGroff and Armando Rosario, they sat in on 2 of my units. One of them, Armando pretended that Dale was his wife and that he was running late, and that I had to make a speed round for both of them based off of what Armando told me. Then when Dale got there, he pretended to be his wife and complained that it was the incorrect order, and then I had to change it within the 5-minute time frame.
Dang.
So
And you're still dealing with your own stuff.
right.
Oh my God.
So it's one of those to where
Camaraderie, though.
yeah, you have like a certain sense, and like I did Bar Advanced. I saw Dale and Dave Wondrich and all of them for the bar training. The FaceTime that I got with Dale, though, for the master accreditation was the exact same. And it's not to say that, like, for the people that do Bar 5-day and spend all that money to go to New York and get educated by that team,
Yeah.
that's a great team, too. It's a great accreditation. I think that that's just as significant as a master accreditation. Where the master accreditation differs slightly is the thesis paper.
And that, which is what we're going to talk about. So before we do that, let's talk a little bit about what we're pouring, because it is part of it had to do with champagne. So that I don't interrupt you while you're telling your story.
No, you're fine.
Let's talk about what we just poured.
Yeah, so this is Nicolas Feuillatte. It is the Reserva. It is Brut, and it's a wonderful champagne. I mean, it's absolutely fantastic. It follows the typical 40-40 split. So you have your 40 white, 40 Pinot Noir, Meunier, and the 20, and then that's essentially it. It's very crisp. It has apricots and pears to it. I think that it's delicious, and I think that it's one of my favorite things to pair with a cigar, dude.
Cheers. And that was the coolest thing to me. So it was on multiple things. So your thesis was on pairings in general, and champagne was like a high. Tell me about that.
So the thesis originally I started in 2015. Once again, I didn't achieve my accreditation until 2018. The thesis originally started off with bottled and barrel-aged cocktails. I was a very big fan of barrel-aged cocktails at the time, and even bottled cocktails, because I loved the idea, going back to cigars, right? Cigars will find themselves inserted throughout the conversation, I'm sure. But I loved the idea that something could age in a bottle or in a barrel. I always loved the maturation side of the business, and I thought that it was the coolest because you set something away that eventually down the road will mature and layer in flavor to something else. Similar to cigars and wines, right? There's a hobby with collecting cigars and aging cigars, having that additional fermentation with Cuban cigars, typically. But there are other cigars too that will kind of lighten up or marry the blends, that they come with, and achieve something that's truly unique 3 years, 4 years, 5 years after they've been rolled.
Yeah. So
with cocktails, I thought, martinis are great. What happens if I age a Vesper for 6 months? What happens if I take a De La Louisiane, age it for a year, see what happens? Maybe I can make something new, right? Something newer by seasoning the barrel with IPA or vermouth or Amara.
What was the name of that thing? What was the thing you just said? It was like a French word.
The De La Louisiane.
Oh yeah, what's that?
Oh, it's a fun cocktail. I'll show you when we go inside.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
actually, I was gonna ask Kyler, lighting and everything. I mean, like, I'm digging this right now. Should we just stay out here if the lighting's okay, and that way we don't have to move everything and stuff like that? Or is the lighting kind of a conflict?
You want to run the whole podcast around here?
I'm enjoying the hell out of it.
I think it looks fine. We've only got one angle though.
But you can still go back and forth, right? Like, does it look good? I mean,
yeah, I can zoom in.
Yeah, because I feel like we don't have the time to go in, start, and set up again like that.
Really don't. Yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like that. And I actually really like this. I feel like it's fun, and I kind of want to make a thing of it, and I don't care if it gets demonetized or whatever. So, like, I mean, we're not monetized
Say
yet.
that now.
Well, we're not monetized yet anyway, so I can feel really good about saying
A
it.
year from now, G, I'm gonna feel bad.
Right, but it's one. You know, if you get demonetized, it'd be demonetized for one thing, right? Like this one video.
No, they can demonetize the whole channel.
For having one cigar.
They might ask you to remove the one video. But
Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see. If I get a year out of it, that'll be good. People will learn. Then we'll.
I mean, by that particular point, hopefully you'll have enough with like the liquor brand sponsoring it and stuff like that you won't have to worry about it.
Yeah. So okay, back into that. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
But so we were talking about, you were thinking about doing the barrel aged.
Yeah. So originally the thesis started off with barrel and bottled aged cocktails, basically aged cocktails, because the criteria was for the thesis you needed to find a relevant bar topic. Number one.
Yeah.
Number two, you had to have a stance on it and defend it, like any good thesis. Going for a PhD, you have to find a subject that's relevant to your degree, right? And you need to be able to defend your stance in some way, shape, or form with the research that you make. So
in the paper, right? Not like it's not a debate verbally, right?
Both.
Whoa.
Yeah, you have to go
and
up.
And this is like this should be world renowned, how tough this is.
You have to go up against Tony Abughanum, Francesco Lafranconi, Dale DeGroff, Armando Rosario, Bobby Lee, all the masters, and you have to present your thesis and give them your stance. So initially, when I presented this, right, I wrote a 14-page research paper. I had not done that since my late teens, early 20s at UNLV. And I never had defended a thesis. I had written a couple of research papers before I dropped out and became a bartender.
Yeah.
Well, before I dropped out, did a couple of things, and then became a bartender, right? But I had never written an actual thesis paper. So I had to figure out how to write a thesis first. Watch a couple of YouTube videos, whatever I got to do, right? And then I had to pick my relevant bar topic. My relevant bar topic was something that I was already doing, which was barrel aging cocktails, right? My stance on it was that I enjoyed it. I thought that it made certain cocktails taste unique and fun. I thought that it was a nice little, trend that could one day have legs in the bar scene. There were obviously people that had been doing it for much longer. There was Morgenthaler over in Portland. There was 69 Colebrook Road, Tony, over in London. There were bars even before that. So as I started researching and going down the rabbit hole, so to speak, I came across Heublein Cocktail Company. Heublein was this cocktail company on the East Coast that originally started as a wedding events party place, essentially. And what they would do is they would, have a bar, have cocktails available for wedding parties. Well, a couple of times it got so bad, I think they were based out of Connecticut or Rhode Island, I forget, that they had to bring everything inside and store it and just reschedule the event. Because the weather was so bad, people didn't want to get married. So they said, okay, how do we keep the cocktails fresh? They were like, well, we're just going to have to throw them in a vat, hope that they make it. So then what they did was they started to pre-batch. And with those batches, they then had to sell them. So they canned them because canning was a very popular trend in the late 1800s, early 1900s, when they were around. So they were essentially the company that canned the original Manhattans, the Harpoon, which would later become the Cosmo, right? It was cranberry juice and vodka.
Oh, okay. Wait,
okay.
That's the Harpoon?
That was the Harpoon back in the day, yeah.
And then the Cape Cod just adds a lime?
Well, no, I mean, I think the Harpoon had lime too, and maybe one other thing, I forget, but it essentially evolved into the Cosmopolitan.
That's awesome. I can't wait till, there's someone that comments about the Harpoon.
Yeah.
I was the original. Some of the comments, it's few right now, but it's very interesting, and I love all the feedback, and I want it to keep coming. I really want people to tell us what they want to see.
Sure.
So it's great, but it is very interesting, hearing what I'm always going to be found wrong on something. So it's waiting for it if I say something. So that's interesting. But okay. So
I write this paper, right? And I'm going over Heublein Cocktail Company. I reach out to Tony down at 69 Colebrook Road, and I try to get an interview with him. Didn't really get much. Morgenthaler, same thing. Couldn't really get him to speak on it, but he had written about it because he wrote columns for Playboy. So I had information that I could extract from Morgenthaler about his stance on barrel-aged cocktails. Because he was kind of the guy for Tales of the Cocktail and all of these award shows that we know now that at their very inception 20 years ago was doing it. So
He's the most scientific of like, right? Like he's the one that really gets molecular on a lot of this stuff like these days that I see.
yeah, I mean
Like the
he does.
Spinzall stuff.
He does now. There were a couple of other people like Wondrich wrote about the Heublein Cocktail Company and about having their canned cocktails back in the day. So I had quotes from Wondrich. And then what I did was Craig Schottler had just come into town. So with his work at the Aviary, they had.
Is he the beverage director or the brains behind Aviary? I'm not
He
familiar
was
with the
the
name.
head executive chef, I believe, at the time. And then he came out here to run the. He was the property mixologist for Aria when he came out here. Now he does all of the beverage for MGM International.
Oh wow, yeah,
Yeah.
I should have known that.
So he's like, no. I mean, if you know, then you know. But at that particular point in time, I had interviewed for the property mixologist spot at Aria that went to Craig. So I knew him from that, and I just said, hey, dude, I remember that you guys had a program for barrel-aged cocktails at the Aviary, which is in Chicago. And at that particular point in time, they were aging outdoors to maximize the amount of humidity and sea kind of salty air that they could get.
That's awesome.
Not really from the sea, but like from the bay, from the river,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. You notice when something's aged near a coast, always.
Right. So I kind of wanted to pick his brain about that. We had Nick Tolley, obviously, who had dabbled in it a little bit. He provided me with an interview along with Craig. And then there was one guy who was running a program here that he would take his old little 1 liter or 3 liter barrels when he was done. He would chop up all the wood staves at Home Depot and he would make his own bitters.
Huh.
So I wanted to get an interview from him to see like the recycling part of it.
Yeah.
Because so many brands, they're willing to give you a barrel, but it's like after 3 or 4 uses, if you're not seasoning it with something, then what do you do with that barrel?
I mean, yeah, it's pretty neutral at that point, you know, too. And
So anyway, long story long, I take this thesis paper that I wrote. It's 14 pages. I had research, I had graphs, I had charts, and now I have to defend it. So they sent it to Steve. Steve sent back some edits that he wanted. He wanted me to take a stance on if I thought that it was a good thing or not. Once again, I did not know how to write a thesis paper.
but also it's like if you're doing it, you think it's a good thing.
Right.
Right.
And then also like kind of just, I guess, have more conviction in my writing. So I
Because
created.
at this point it was more like clinical, like you're doing research, but you're not making it personalized.
I was doing research, but I wasn't explaining what my goal was.
Okay, fair.
Like,
I've never wrote a thesis myself, so I'm learning even more.
that was the thing, right? Like I had it, so I was just like, oh, I actually like when I defend this, I just thought that I was talking about how like this is a significant part of our history.
Right.
Like it should be included in
It's
relevant
cool.
bar topics.
I like it. You'll like it.
Yeah. So my big stance at the end of it that I defended was that I thought there should be a categorization system. I thought that we should basically have, like we do with tequila, Blanco, Repo, and Añejo. Start off with the 3 categories. Let's just have barrel-aged, extra barrel-aged, and then, like, additional barrel aging. And then if there's some sort of seasoning, put an S at the end of it. When you write a menu and you have a barrel-aged cocktail, let people know how long it's been barrel-aged. If it's 3 months or less, it's been barrel-aged. If it's 6 months to a year, let's say, extra barrel aged. If it's, extra barrel aged, anything over a year, right? Barreled or bottled. And then if you season it, put an S at the end.
Right.
And then you create the whole entire dialogue where like you go up to a bar, you want a martini. Hi, I would like a martini. Okay, do you want that shaken or stirred? Would you like vodka or gin? Do you like it dry? Want vermouth? Those questions that get asked every single day behind the bar that create that dialogue, I wanted them to have when somebody went to Vesper at that time and ordered the barrel-aged Manhattan. How long has it been barrel-aged? Do you season the barrel with anything? Education, interaction. That was the goal that I wanted to achieve. So I defended this. I think that Francesco fell asleep. Tony had a whole bunch of questions for me about if it was just a trend or a fad that was going to go away. And probably about 25 minutes into my presentation, I knew that I wasn't going to convince them that I had the answers or that my thesis was like going to be relevant in 5 years.
Wow. So that's thinking ahead though too. And to be honest with you, you were right.
Yeah.
Getting ahead of you a little bit, you must have changed it, but
Well, they were right. They were right in not giving me the accreditation and forcing me to go back to the drawing board. So
So that another year?
close, about 6 8 months. 3 of them were me trying to figure out what the fuck am I going to write about,
Right.
or research. And then I basically went lowest common denominator. What do I know more than everybody in that room? Cigars. I know more about cigars than everybody in that room. So
Easily.
how do I tie this into beverage? Well, there's going to be a lot more cigar bars in the future.
What, do you have a crystal ball?
No. I knew because I had grown up in Las Vegas, and in order to achieve a liquor license with a cigar bar, it was very, very difficult. But I knew that all it was going to take was the right casino to get on board with it. And once the right casino got on board with it, then everything else would follow. And also, because of the fact that for a very long time, our tax code was that every cigar that was sold in the state had to have 33% tax added on top of MSRP, unless you were in tribal land, right?
Yeah.
So I figured that one day the tax laws will loosen up and we'll be like other states, like we are now, where it's only 50 cents on top of MSRP.
Okay.
Because think about it. You go to buy this cigar. Let's say that this cigar, it's only a $9.75 MSRP, but let's say that it was $30. 33% on top of that makes it a $40 cigar.
Right.
50 cents only makes it $30.50.
Right. I'll say, like, just like with the champagne that I wanted to mention, is a big thing for me too is the cost versus the profile and stuff. But this is an excellent champagne that you can get and stock at your house. Whereas I love Dom, right? I can't stock that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's one of the, I hate to say bang for buck, but like the value of it, it's like, I love the crispness. It's really traditional, but it's, man, so I'm glad you brought this, and it's fantastic with this. So back to.
Yeah, I will say that I enjoy it more than the espresso. I felt like the espresso, although the espresso was delicious, it was kind of overwhelming on my palate in the first third of the cigar. I think that now that we're like kind of getting further into the blend, it's getting a little bit spicier, stronger. Like the espresso would probably go great, but the champagne is fantastic with it.
So that's so you said we're past the first third. So look at a cigar always in thirds.
I like to. Obviously, some of them that are a little bit shorter, it's like half-half. But I think that most of them can be drilled into thirds, and that's typically how, when I do a cigar review on my channel, I'm judging based off of the first third, the second third, and the final third. Typically, at the end of the second third or about midway through is when I'll offer up a pairing, because then I'll have a general consensus after about 35, 45 minutes, depending upon the size of the cigar and the blend composition, what it tastes like.
Wow.
What does the blend taste like to me?
Yeah.
Like with this one, if I had to describe it, I would say that there's definitely some coffee to it, right? Probably not espresso, but definitely medium roast.
See, I didn't want to say that because I was like, I'm going to say coffee, but you're like, yeah, you're drinking it, dummy.
There's definitely coffee, and it could be influenced from the coffee, right? But there's like nuttiness. There's earthiness, like you said before, like a mushroom.
I think I was confusing like a certain nuttiness too for like, cause I was like, what flavor is it? It's not like it's not like, I was trying to like decipher, sometimes not knowing what, certain things taste like too. Like I haven't tasted, that much stuff. Like there's a lot of flavors that if you haven't tasted, it's hard to connotate.
Sure.
But it's,
you build up a system in your head.
Yeah.
And, like sometimes I'll be talking with my wife and she'll pick up a flavor that's very Japanese, and like shisho leaf or something like that, right?
And you're like, when was the last time you had one?
I don't know where.
You have one handy so I can compare.
Every cognac has plum, like every cognac. It's like umishu. Okay, cool.
Oh my God.
But, going back to the whole entire thesis thing though. So I said, I know more about cigars than they do. They might know more about certain bar aspects, but I know more about cigars. And they might be able to tell me, because they've opened and ran venues a lot longer than I have, what's going to be a fad and what's not going to be. But I think I got this one. And I figured that if the tax liability and a casino got on board, I never predicted Resort World would be the catalyst and 8 Lounge.
Right.
But I knew that there was the potential. There was the possibility. So I said, let me incorporate this. Also, another little tidbit. The original USBG Master Accreditation that Livio wrote had a section in it about cigars.
Wow. Okay.
And it said in there that a well-educated bartender, a well-trained bartender, would understand the basic aspects of cigars in case they worked at high limit or a bar that traditionally and has always had cigars available for guests.
A
Like
great bartender should be somewhat of a Renaissance man or woman,
100%, I
as much
believe
as
that.
possible.
Yeah.
You know, like obviously you can't be. It's like one of those things: a jack of all trades, a master of none. But as a
You have
bartender,
to finish the quote though.
well, wait, what else is there? Oh man, now I'm a dummy. Shit, I thought that was the whole quote.
A jack of all trades is not a master of, or a jack of all trades, master of one. What the hell's the quote? What's the original
I just
quote?
remember it's
Jack of all trades is a master of none.
yeah.
Jack of all trades is a master of none is better than a master of one.
Oh,
is the
okay.
total is the whole quote.
Absolutely.
Sorry, I was getting
And
it
then-
backwards. I was like, wait, hold on.
Especially in this day and age. But yeah, absolutely. And that's, you know, that's kind of been, because a lot of people were like, oh, you don't know this drink. And I've said this before in the podcast, and I'm like, I know a lot of drinks. I don't know nearly half of them, right? Because I only make a certain amount. And the
Yeah.
classics, knowing the classics is crucial because the classics are classics for a reason.
Sure.
You're going to get them ordered all the time. You know, so I'm pretty big on try to be versed a little bit in everything. Just like I haven't had time for football this year. And that's like a weakness for me right now when people are like, oh, what do you think about the game? And I'm like, shit. You know what I mean? And it's just one of those things that people rely on the bartender to just have the information, you know? Not
Yeah.
only what do you do and what do you have in your hand, which it kind of bums me out when people have no idea what they're doing, like pouring or whatever. They're just, you know, they can do the mechanics of one of the comments recently was, hey, if you're the low man, if a child can do your job, then you just sit there and like do your job and don't tell me how to be or whatever. And I was like, dang. But that I agree in a sense that there are people that kind of sully. You get that kind of person because you have people that don't care and don't take their job seriously. And I think that it's and I'm getting you away from your thesis, but it's like,
No, you're fine.
you know, I think that's a crucial part of being good at any job is not just honing in on what your specific title is, but to also know that the surrounding effects, the surrounding accoutrement that, you know, really brings up an evening for the guest. Because you're always thinking, what's the guest getting out of this? Not
Sure.
just what's my job here. What's the guest need from this place? What's the guest need from this venue?
Well, I could throw that back the exact same way. Like for the last, it's going to be 10 years next year. I've worked at Southern. I've worked on the distribution side. The first 5, I was an educator on the mixology team, right? Collaborating with Francesco Lafranconi, Livio, JR, Max, some of the smartest dudes that I've ever had the pleasure of working with.
Everyone, my mentor, including you.
Well, I appreciate that. But I don't hold a candle to people like Francesco that have educated bartenders for 30 years, including myself, in 2013, you know, and has gone on to open up bars and concepts across pretty much the entire country, right? But the thing is, though, is that I got to collaborate with, that was my coworker.
Man.
That was my colleague. And that was one of the major sell points of taking that role was to be able to bring up the whole entire community from the inside of the distributor, right? And work on projects across the whole entire state, much less the country, right? That was why I originally signed up. It wasn't because I wanted to wear a suit and hang out with the Italians. Although it was a lot of fun to dress up every day and hang out with the Italians.
I kind of like, I look at you guys and I was like, man, I can't wait till I can wear a suit. Yeah.
I think that like they've gotten very laxed about the dress code now, and like part of me is like it's okay, but then also I'm like, man, it's kind of nice when we were like required to be in a tie every day and a suit. That was pretty dope.
There's something to be said about being the elder statesman, though. You know, like when you've done it, now you're teaching it, and then you've been teaching it and doing it so long. And I mean, like I know the academy has changed, and now it's pretty much just Livio like running that. But
Yeah.
I remember when it was you, JR, Max, and Jessica Waugh.
Yeah, that's another. I mean, point out Joe Phillips, Jessica Wass, Sam Merritt.
Oh, and Joe
you
Phillips,
know?
fan too.
I mean, like there were to be in that education crowd. You know, I mean, I think that I learned more about sake from Jessica than anybody that I've ever met.
Yeah.
Joe Phillips and her both instrumental in wine, and just being able to sit in on those classes and watch the way that they taught made me a better teacher in that way.
100%.
You know, so like the first 5 years with that, going back to the initial point, first 5 years with that, and then boom, pandemic hits, everybody gets displaced. We don't know if we're going to recreate the education team. What do? you know, start interviewing with people, suppliers. Maybe I'll go to the supplier side. Maybe I'll go back to operations. Don't know. You know, and then lo and behold, Southern comes back and they're like, hey, do you want to sell? And it's like, well, the last time I sold stuff, I was like 15 and a half working at Best Buy doing retail. I know how to. I can certainly sell spirits, wine, and beer. Yeah, let's try it out. And then, you know, like in doing that for the first time, having sold with people, but never just having a route my own. And
But you were more of like, let me be like the schmooze, like I'm like greasing the, because you're not like in it to be like, I need to sell these units. You're just like,
Yeah.
I'm at that time. You're like, oh, I'm gonna validate this by like, because I'm the master mixologist. I know this stuff, but I know that's not how you approach it. But
Yeah.
when you come and sit down on a tasting with me prior to you being a rep, which I've never actually had you as my rep, so that's a bummer. But prior
You
to
never
me,
know.
if you sat in on a tasting, I'm like, what? This is awesome. You know, now I
Yeah.
feel like, oh, this is an important conversation. You know.
Yeah.
So it's like when you're selling cars, which I sold cars for a very brief period, but it's a scheme that they're waiting for their chance. Like as soon as you're about to say no, they're like, hold on, let me see what I can do. And they
Yeah,
go
let
in
me
the
go
back,
check with the manager.
and then the manager comes out. He's like, hey, I heard great things about your credit. You know. So it's like that's kind of like that. It's like bringing that a different level of like experience where they're like, hey, he's not in it for the sale necessarily. He's in it for the craft. And
Well, I mean, like that's the way to approach it too. Like, do I just go into an account and I'm like, hey, I'm your rep? You know, or am I still the same guy who, you know, at the end of the day, like, I'll help you out with your bar program. You want help with the menu? Do you want me to come in and talk about the products with the staff? You know, and like,
that's fun.
Be that extra layer that can benefit the company the best and also benefit the products the best. Like, you know, you take accountability for the job that you're doing. And that goes to like your larger, broader point, I feel like, where, yeah, I could just put my head down and go, hey, man, I'm just here to take your order.
Yeah.
You know, or like, hey, I have these 3 things for you to try. Here's a tech sheet.
Exactly.
But is that how I'm going to approach it?
Yeah.
No. Especially like with the fact that some of the people, like I sell to a group right now. I mean, I handle Caesars Entertainment, which is the probably second largest account that we have on prem, right? There's MGM and there's Caesars.
Yeah.
So for those resorts, a lot of those people remember me from doing their cocktail presentations for the pools every year, the Flamingo Go pool, the Venus pool, the Caesars pool, all that stuff, right? So it's like, they're like, hey, Mike, can you help us this year? Absolutely. I'm not just there to take their order. They know me from the past, you know? And like when it came down to, we opened 3 restaurants, Gordon Ramsay Burger, Pinky's by Vanderpump, and next week it's going to be Havana 1957 at Flamingo. 3 new restaurants, 1 casino. They're like, hey, can you talk to the mixologist that's coming in from Ramsay? Hey, can you talk to the group at Ramsay Burger? And maybe we could do like a little Spirits 101 like you used to do back in the academy?
Absolutely.
100%. Like what? I'm not just there to take their order, but they also know me from before that, you know? So it's like, it's one of those dynamics where you want to try to give as much as you possibly can, even though the job description doesn't necessarily say that that's what you have to do. It's what you want to do.
Right.
Right. And how you apply the skills and the knowledge that you've learned. Like even when I talk to bartenders now, I bring up the academy. I'm not an educator for the academy anymore, but you can learn a lot of stuff from Livia.
If I may, I have been made fun of in this town because I've been called like a Southern wine fanboy and stuff like that. And I'm like, honestly, I'm a fan of the people they hire. They have great products because they're Southern wine and they're a huge brand and they're a huge, you know, the biggest distribution company in national, but Vegas is its own special like spot.
Yeah.
But when Michael LePen, I've mentioned him before, brought me into the academy the first time because he just noticed that I cared at Capitol Grill. And he's like, I think you're going to benefit from this. And I was like, all right. And not only was it, at the time, it was like almost $600 to go. And I got it for free to be with him. Yeah. And then I sat next to him. And then that's when I got to meet you, JR, Max. And it's like, he's like here, and he's like personally introducing me to you guys. And like, that's where I was like, oh man, I found maybe not exactly what I want to do because I'm not the best rep, but it's like, I was like, man, I gotta be involved with this group. This is kind of the way I want to be. So when I say mentor, I'm like, it's more than just being a teacher. It's like someone that I'm like, I want to emulate that. You know what I mean? I want to be respected that way, not because I look the part, because I enrich people's experience make them passionate about bartending or whatever you're doing. It's, you know, and I found more recently than ever that the more I do what I enjoy, that, you know, it's like try to find something you enjoy that you can make money out of. And it's like the more that I'm just doing it for love of the game, you know, because it's like, you know, what's the money like tonight? What's the tips? Because I still bartend a couple nights a week, and it's like you see the servers that they're like, oh, we didn't make. I made this much. I pulled in that much. I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm like, I do not care. Like, because at the end of the day, I know I'm going to do a good job. I know it's going to be good enough, you know, because law of averages.
Sure.
And then it's like, but really, what I'm looking for is my nights made when someone's like, that. This has been like one of our best evenings in memory.
Yeah, or you
And
get
you're like,
that return
boom.
guest that comes
know.
back like, hey, we just wanted to spend the 2 nights that we had in town with you.
Like,
Right? Is that not like the best feeling
it's
as
incredible.
a bartender?
You know, I've some of my best friends in the world are people that were started off across from me at the bar, and now I sit next to them at the bar too. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like Tim Weigel, when we presented our master accreditations together, I had already been at Southern for almost a full year. I think it was like August of 2016. I passed, and his was all about cachaça and barrel aged cachaças from Brazil. He went to Brazil for 3 weeks,
Jeez.
brought back 26 samples, and created a thesis around that. So
That Tim Weigel is probably the most knowledgeable person that still bartends like 5 days a week.
probably,
You know what I mean? 'Cause
probably
it's like
still the
eventually
same. Yeah,
you get that much
I would
knowledge
agree with that.
and that accreditation. You're like, oh, you could be like the equivalent of a som, but for spirits like around
Yeah.
the world. But he loves the game. He loves the bartending so much that he won't leave bartending. You know,
I
but he
say-
still educates at a bunch of places.
Dude, I speak his name a lot because I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. He came in 2015, my last bar shift at Central at the time, now Cafe Americano at Caesars. He came, sat at the rail, ordered a couple of drinks, and we just shared, you know, a moment that whole entire like shift, my last shift, which was the last shift that I was going to ever have bartending full time for the last 10 years, which now
Man.
means so much to me in hindsight, right? And it was my program, so to speak, where I had a lot of control over it, and I had a lot of people that I worked with, like Gene Samuel, like Adam O'Donnell, who just opened up his own bar, you know,
Jive
and
Turkey.
worked at Herbs and Rye afterwards, you know, and like Nick Tully came and sat at the rail, and G, and a lot of the family and friends that I grew up around and competed with and competed against, and so on and so forth. So Tim's Tim and I, we share a very like strong connection in our upbringing in the industry together. So I'll always speak very highly about Tim because it means a lot to me. But yeah, it's just like it's one of those where you I forget the original point that we were on. It was
Well, it started because I still need to hear about how the champagne became your thesis, but
oh yeah. So
we-
we still got to get back.
we were
to
just
the
waxing
thesis.
on about
Yeah.
how great Tim Weigel and the rest of you guys were at you know, that all got your master's accreditations and stuff.
Well, I mean, I don't know about how great we were.
I can
but-
tell you. I'm telling you from the guy that's sitting here across from you, just because of what you guys did for me.
Well, we need more people to come after to validate all of that. In
And
my own personal opinion, but
I
going
think
back
you're going to see a lot of that.
I hope so. And I'm all for it. And in any way, shape, or form that I can help it, I'm all about it. So yeah, call me, text me, bother me.
You know I
tell
do.
tell them to bother me. I'm all about it, man. I want to see people validate Tim and mine's existence, and JR's for sure. But the whole entire like thesis thing. So I said, you know what? I know way more about cigars. I can make this work. And I started with my thesis about cigars follow spirits and just alcoholic beverages in a lot of ways. They both receive a fermentation. That's how it starts. You don't get alcohol without fermentation. You don't get a cigar without fermentation.
I bet you a lot of people don't know that. I forget that, you know.
It's okay. It's not probably the most common subject around the bar. You know, especially when you're at the rail having drinks with your friends, you're probably not talking about cigars all that much. And when somebody does bring it up, it's like, hey, let's go have a cigar. You know, let's go hang
Well,
out.
I
and chat.
learned it because I'm not a great golfer. And, you know, you lose respect if you can't hit a decent swing sometimes and you're trying to actually seal a deal business-wise.
Sure.
So I was like, well, if I can't golf, I should learn how to smoke cigars because that's another boardroom. You know what I mean?
Sure.
You know, where this is where, in my opinion, where real deals and real conversations happen when you're in a relaxed setting. You know, it doesn't have to involve alcohol to smoke a cigar, which is another cool thing. So it's no pressure because I see you drink more espresso than I do alcohol. You know, if you have any sometimes. at the cigar lounge. So
Typically, when I'm out smoking amongst friends, because I don't drink that often anymore. Like
it's lost its luster.
no, it's not that it's lost its luster. So first off, my wife does not drink. Secondly, uh, if she's not going to drink and imbibe, then I'm the one who's drinking and imbibing. Like it's kind of like it's not fun for me on a singular standpoint. I
100%.
like drinking with people. And then another thing too is that I'm always very self-conscious about how am I getting home, and what time do I want to get home, and then also is this going to affect my performance the next day? The cigar is not. However, if I have one or two drinks, typically I'm looking at a hangover the next day nowadays. It's a little bit different from when I was first starting out bartending and I was like 27, 28 to being 38 now. Hits me a little bit harder the next day.
Yeah.
And then when those 10 a.m. meetings do come, or those 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. meetings come, and we're talking about KPIs and sales numbers and, cases and this, that, and the other thing, then I'm like, man, I could have just had an espresso and I would have been fine.
100%.
I could have just had some water.
Maybe stayed up a little later.
Yeah, maybe stayed up a little bit later. But like, I'm a big advocate for sleep now. I wasn't when I was bartending, and it's probably why I got as many gray hairs as I did. Probably not the alcohol, but the lack of sleep, Because I would, especially my first year at Southern, dude, whew, there were some nights because I was trying to figure out how to go from the bar world that was, you get off shift at midnight, you go to Herbs and Rye for happy hour, go have a couple of drinks at your local watering hole afterwards, 4 a.m. hits, and then boom, I got to be in the office at 9. So I get a couple of hours,
The reason I couldn't make it as a rep is because of the early mornings. I'm still a night owl, If you see me working a morning shift, it's going to be bloodshot eyes.
Yeah.
And it's going to be quiet.
I wear contacts, so that helps. But still, it's one of those to where I realized, that I also had to kind of mature into the role. I wasn't fully ready just yet. And over time, I started to take more accountability for myself and be like, hey, I'm here to represent the company. Like, I need to make sure that I'm dialed in 100% of the way, because we would also, make a cocktail menu, train a staff, and then go and check the openings and the unveilings and stuff like that, and be a part of the scene so much more so than I am now as a rep, right? But when you would go to these places that would open up at 10 p.m. or stay open really late, 3-4 nights a week, I remember, like, one of my funny stories about Southern is I remember JR, who was technically my manager at the time, he pulled me off to the side. I think it was like my first 3 months. And he was like, hey, listen, so HR wanted me to talk to you. And I'm like, oh God.
Already?
What did I do? And he's like, so you know how we have the designated driver's, car service takes you and your car home? I'm like, yeah, of course. I love Dom. Well, Dom didn't own the company at the time, but I was like, I love that service. They pick me up all the time. Yeah. He's like, yeah, so you've used it 11 times in the last 20 days. And HR thought that maybe you just might be, like if you needed to call somebody and talk to somebody about it.
There's programs.
He's like, I know that you're fine. I just wanted to double check with you because they asked me to check
This
in
ain't
with
me talking.
Yeah.
This is HR saying.
And I'm like, oh God, really?
When the person that doesn't even know you is asking questions about you.
Well, JR knew me, but
the
HR, yeah.
HR just threw a piece of paper.
Oh man, it was so funny. And like the thing is about the driving service and all that stuff is that they're like, look, we don't ask questions. You take it as often as you need because you get a DUI, you're done. So like my whole entire first month, I was like, well, I've been at work since 8 a.m. It's midnight. I've had 2 drinks. I'm tired. I'm more so worried about being tired.
Right.
Right? So let me call. Let me wait the extra 30 minutes and get a ride home. So I would do that as like...
That's like I'm avoiding any possibility of risk.
Any possibility. I am not going to mess this up. Right?
Yeah.
So I did that my whole entire first year. And I mean, like I probably, went at it an additional 20 times after that. So probably like 30 rides over the course of 365 days, like to make sure that but that first month when I was still acclimating to the schedule and just like being really, really tired all day, like, yeah, it was a lot. So, that whole entire thing, but Did we cover the thesis?
I keep
We
interrupting
still-
you with questions. This is the problem when I
Well,
have
we
too
could
many
also
questions.
probably have a conversation about anything.
No, we're gonna have to have you back on, but I want you to finish your thesis because we're almost out of time.
Cool.
And then I do want to talk about finishing how you finish with a cigar. Because it just gets left. It just gets left in there. You don't smudge it out. That's
No.
another etiquette thing that for my people that are just gonna try starting a cigar after this. Just one of those things like I learned, and I'm glad I learned it. Is you just leave it in there and let it.
Yeah, you
let
don't
it
have
go
to
out.
tap it. You can just brush it off to the side to get the ash, out of there. And then if there isn't enough of a flame still on it, like if you start to see it tunnel on one side or anything like that, you can just touch it up real quick. And this is one of the benefits to not using the cedar right away, is that you can spot touch it.
And then getting down to this end gets pretty potent,
Yeah.
heavy nicotine compared to the beginning,
Well,
right?
it's
Or it's the same amount.
it's almost like now you're doing the distillation, right? So you're taking something from solid to vapor
Okay.
the whole entire time that you're smoking it. But as you get closer and closer, the heat is closer. So it feels more potent
Okay.
because you're burning at a much closer clip than when the cigar is at its original length.
Well, and I noticed if I smoke it down to the nub,
Mhm.
I almost sometimes get a little nauseous. But I could stop now and smoke another like short one like that Umagog. But actually, that's still a little bit longer. I'd probably get an even shorter one than that. But like, 'cause I like to do like one regular size one and then like a shorter
Yeah.
finisher. But I don't always like. I'll probably put this out now if we weren't finishing up right now.
And that speaks to the alkalinity of the cigars too, right? When you feel nauseous, it's a signal from your brain saying that you need something sweet
Yeah.
or something to kind of help your digestive system cope with all the alkalinity that you're providing it in your salivatory and like your mouth, right? So your brain is tricking you into eating something or providing it with some sugar where like if you have a piece of chocolate the next time that you're nauseous or you sip on something with some sugar, it'll probably help you like quell your stomach.
Huh. I love that.
Yeah. And then,
Okay, and I'm not going to interrupt you for the thesis thing too. I'm
no,
going to
no,
let
no,
you
no.
finish.
So like I go back to the drawing board. I feel comfortable with presenting cigars and how they should be a topic taught to bartenders, how bartenders should at least have an inherent knowledge of the process because the fact that they undergo fermentation, it's almost like a mini distillation when you really think about it,
Right.
right? Going from solid to vapor and then back into flavor and so on and so forth, right? And also, as far as we know, history of civilization, I call these commodities of civilization. That'll
Absolutely.
probably end up being the book that I write one day in
Wow.
the near future. But it's like the Greeks planted grapes, they traded in tobacco. Many civilizations before them, Aztecs, Mayans, different things like that, right? They planted tobacco, they cultivated tobacco, they traded tobacco, just like alcohol. So, from the times of early antiquity, we have brought together with us all the way to the current stage alcohol. We have brought with us all the way to the current stage tobacco. Now, we could argue that tobacco in its new forms, cigarettes and stuff like that, the more recent inventions of the last couple of hundred years, probably not healthy for us. However, for a very long time, the U.S. was the number one cigar producing country in the world in the 1800s. Like Virginia, Connecticut, Kentucky. These are all places that tobacco is naturally growing all the time and being utilized in cigars, in cigarettes, in other tobacco industries.
But the tobacco grown here isn't as, and I told you I wasn't going to interrupt, but the tobacco grown here isn't the same as isn't as respected as the tobacco grown in like Cuba or Nicaragua,
Well,
right?
there's a partial reason for that. So when the U.S. was the number one tobacco producing country, the in-style blend was Candelas. They were very green. Those were the most widely consumed cigars in the States. They didn't really have fermentation down with cigars. It was in Cuba, in the soil, and in the fermentation and techniques where a lot of that was perfected.
Yeah.
So initially, you had, have you ever seen the terminology EMS, English Market Selection,
No.
when it comes to cigars? So typically there were two different market selections. There was the American market selection, there was the English market selection. American market selection back in the late 1800s, early 1900s were all Candelas. They were under fermented, they were very green to the wrapper, right? Almost like bright green, like a grasshopper. And they were cut short on the photosynthesis stage, and they were very under fermented. So they had a ton of very bright grassy flavor to them, but overall they were probably inadequate to what we currently smoke. Cuba and the English market selection were heavier fermentations, not like anything past what we're smoking right now, or like really dark Maduros, but they were at least brown. And that's where Cuba really excelled, because when the US stopped producing a ton of tobacco and they left it to other countries to really produce it, Cuba kind of came up to in the forefront as having the highest selection. Then you had people like JFK that were very well known cigar smokers, other presidents, celebrities, and Cuban cigars became kind of the in vogue.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So the Bay of Pigs and all the stuff that happened in the 50s and 60s that ended up ceasing trade with Cuba, and then it became the forbidden fruit. Americans weren't allowed to buy Cuban cigars. And you know what happens when we're told that we can't have something?
Gotta have it.
Gotta, just like
It's the American way.
just like alcohol. So that ties back into my thesis and what I eventually presented to the Master Accreditation Committee. And then, lo and behold, I achieved my Master Accreditation in 2018
And
or 2016.
yeah, to finish up, that's basically I've been regurgitating that since I learned about you and learned about that thesis. That I love talking to people, because everyone that I ever ask me for a cigar, they go, "Oh, I should have whiskey, right?" And I'm like,
Yeah.
technically, and I if you ask me a question, I'm going to give you an answer. I try not to be too teachy unless you ask stuff. But a lot of people will say, "So yeah, whiskey is like what you drink with cigars," and I'm like, man, that's like out of all the pairings I can think of, that's like the fifth or sixth of beverage,
Yeah.
And my favorite, and I think that's also why I became such a champagne and bubbles drinker, was because the effervescence of it alone, not even just the flavor pairings, but the lightness and how it makes my mouth feel still fresh when
Yeah.
you're smoking something heavy like this. Not necessarily heavy, but you know what I mean? Heavy
Well,
on
there's
your
those
palate.
compounds, right? Polyphenols, compounds, all that stuff. It kind of just like cleanses it real quick.
Mike, if we weren't out of time, we could have done this for 3 hours. We were actually supposed to cut this short and go inside to the Pouring Stories bar.
I apologize.
No, to me, this tells me that there's a lot more to go over.
Yeah.
Because we barely scratched the surface. So I'm looking forward to maybe, I'm going to pitch it here. Maybe you do like a quarterly if our guests like it and they respond well. We do this quarterly and kind of just have the smoking section for Pouring Stories.
Yeah, man.
Once a quarter.
I'd love it, dude. Absolutely, 100% count me in. And leave a comment below. Let me know or let Mike know if you want the other Mike to come on and join Mike.
Yeah, yeah, and please, if you haven't had Nicolas Feuillatte yet, I recommend it highly. If you haven't watched Master Your Ash and you have any questions, pairings, something you want to know about cigars, it's if you don't know about the cigar, I would go Master Your Ass, search the cigar name, and see if he has a review on it, because that'll save you a lot of time on finding what flavors for you. But Mike, thank you.
Yeah, man.
I
Absolutely.
appreciate you.
Thank you again.
Cheers. See you
Cheers,
again
brother.
soon.